There's a moment in healing that feels indistinguishable from failure. Not dramatic, not loud, just quietly vacant. You wake up, and the drive that once carried you forward is gone. The hunger, the urgency, the relentless need to improve, to prove, to move. It doesn't fade gradually. It simply dissolves. And what replaces it is not peace. It is a stillness so deep it feels unsettling, almost like decay. Most people misinterpret this moment. They label it laziness, depression, burnout. They assume something has gone wrong and try to correct it quickly. But Jung documented something far more disturbing beneath the surface. He observed that when the psyche begins to heal, motivation is often the first thing to disappear, not because something is broken, but because something false has finally exhausted itself. What most people misunderstand is that motivation is rarely clean. It is usually borrowed energy, drawn from fear, shame, comparison, or survival strategies formed long before awareness ever arrived. Much of what you called ambition was actually defense. Much of what you called discipline was pressure. Much of what you called drive was an unconscious attempt to outrun an internal fracture. Jung observed that the psyche will tolerate enormous suffering if it believes survival depends on it. But the moment survival no longer requires performance, the system shuts itself down. This is where healing becomes frightening, because the part of you that knows how to strive does not know how to rest, and the part of you that knows how to rest has never been allowed to speak. When healing begins, psychic energy does not vanish. It withdraws. It turns inward rather than outward, away from goals, validation and identity, and toward repair. This inward movement looks like stagnation to the ego, but Jung documented it as a necessary descent. Energy does not disappear, it relocates, and during this relocation, the outer personality experiences something like a power outage. You feel flat, uninspired, disconnected from the future. The old visions no longer compel you, but nothing new has arrived to replace them. This is not a void that needs to be filled. It is a threshold that must be crossed. What terrified Jung was not madness. It was the moment the ego realizes it is no longer governing the process. During healing, the unconscious assumes command, and the unconscious does not communicate in plans, goals, or timelines. It speaks through symptoms, through dreams, through exhaustion, through a sudden refusal to participate in the life you once lived automatically. The psyche knows when an identity has expired, even when you do not. So it removes the energy that once animated it. This is why motivation feels inaccessible. Because motivation belonged to a version of you that can no longer exist. You are not unmotivated. You are between structures. Jung documented that whenever an old adaptation dissolves, disorientation follows. The psyche enters a neutral zone, no longer organized around the old pattern, but not yet stabilized around the new one. This space feels empty because it is empty of compulsion, and compulsion is what once moved you. A nervous system, trained for years to operate under threat, finally receives permission to stand down. When that happens, the adrenaline-driven self collapses. What remains feels unfamiliar, quiet, and strangely unresponsive to pressure. This is where most people panic. They attempt to force momentum. They shame themselves for slowing down. They search for stimulation, productivity systems, external motivation. They try to resurrect the old engine. But Jung observed that this resistance only prolongs suffering, because healing is not additive, it is subtractive. It removes what was built to survive, not what was meant to live. During this phase, the psyche is metabolizing pain, that was never fully felt, grief that had no space, anger that was swallowed for safety, fear that was once adaptive but slowly became corrosive. This internal processing demands immense energy. That energy is being spent whether you consciously recognize it or not, which is why you feel exhausted without doing anything. The body understands what the conscious mind resists. Jung documented that transformation is always accompanied by a loss of former vitality, not because life force has disappeared, but because it has changed allegiance. You are no longer animated by urgency. You are being reorganized by truth. This process is slower, heavier, more deliberate. It does not respond to deadlines. It responds to readiness. Motivation, as you once experienced it, was a signal from the persona, the social mask constructed to function, perform, and belong. Healing dismantles that mask, and when the mask dissolves, the energy that sustained it dissolves with it. This is why nothing feels worth chasing. The psyche is no longer interested in applause. It is interested in alignment. What most people misunderstand is that this phase is not designed to be productive. It is designed to be honest. Jung observed that when the unconscious is ignored, it sabotages. But when it is finally acknowledged, it demands silence. Not forever, but long enough. There is a reason ancient myths place transformation in caves, deserts, and underworlds. These are spaces stripped of stimulation, stripped of progress, stripped of recognition. They are places where the old self dissolves without witnesses. Dissolution feels like depression in a culture addicted to motion. But Jung documented this state not as pathology, but as reorganization. The psyche is quietly deciding what will move you next, and it will not be fear. It will not be scarcity. It will not be the need to earn worth. That entire motivational architecture has been dismantled. What replaces it arrives without announcement, not as a surge, but as a gravity. One day, something begins to matter again, not because you should care, but because you do. This motivation does not shout. It does not rush. It does not consume you. It feels sober, anchored, inevitable. Jung observed that when action finally returns after healing, it carries a different weight. It is no longer reactive. It is sovereign. You move because movement is true. You stop because stopping is true. There is no internal argument. The reason this phase feels unbearable is because the ego demands reassurance. It wants proof that the emptiness is leading somewhere. It wants guarantees. But transformation does not provide guarantees. It provides coherence. You are not meant to feel motivated right now. You are meant to feel stripped of false urgency, stripped of borrowed desire, stripped of the identity that survived by striving. This is not the absence of life force. It is the withdrawal of a substance you once depended on. And like any withdrawal, it feels like death before it feels like clarity. Jung documented that those who endure this phase without betraying it emerge altered, quieter, more selective, dangerously grounded. They no longer chase meaning. Meaning begins to organize itself around them. If you are in this space, nothing has gone wrong. Something irreversible has begun. Your old motivation is gone because it completed its task. It kept you alive. What comes next is not motivation. It is orientation. And once it arrives, you will never confuse movement with worth again. The stillness you are in is not empty. It is listening. And when it finishes listening, it will move.